Today on the Relationship Renovation podcast, we are incredibly lucky to have Dr. Jessica Higgins with us. And we engage in just a really compelling and insightful conversation around transforming conflict into connected communication. And we discuss the topic of using requests and reveals specifically as just a wonderful tool to take a moment that might be really difficult and turn it into a connecting moment with your partner. So please stay tuned. I know you're going to get a ton out of this episode. Are you looking to make your relationship better? Do you want to feel more emotionally and intimately connected with your partner? Then we have the tool that is exactly right for you. We have a program called Relationship Renovation at Home, and it is an amazing way for you and your partner to have a structured way weekly to work together. It has lessons, it has videos, it has worksheets for you and your partner to work on together to move through and to build the relationship that you want to have.
EJ and I created this because we are just so passionate about helping couples feel freedom in their relationships. And again, this is just a way that we can give back to help couples globally really build secure, healthy functioning within their relationships because we deserve awesomeness in our relationships.
So if you're interested in this, just go to our website, relationshiprenovation.com. At the top, there's a link to at-home program, and it will give you a free lesson. If you want to just check it out and see if it's something that works for you and your partner, please give it a shot. We know it will make a significant positive impact on your relationship.
Hello, all, and welcome to the Relationship Renovation Podcast. I'm Tarah Kerwin.
And my name is EJ Kerwin. And we're very excited today because we have someone we've spoken with before. We had a great time talking on her podcast. And now she's here to share on our podcast and bring her expertise and her just like wonderful spirit. Her name is Dr. Jessica Higgins. She's a licensed psychologist. She is a certified coach, and she specializes in working with couples and in relationship issues. And we have a great topic today around criticism. But first, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, welcome, Jessica. It's just wonderful to see you again.
Thank you so much for having me. I love what you're both doing, and it's wonderful to be on the show with you both.
Well, first, we'd love you just to sort of introduce yourself to our audience and also just why you've decided over these years to specialize in working with relationships.
Yes, I'm happy to. I'll do my best to weave my personal in with a little bit of my background. Just it tends to integrate for me anyway. I very much believe in walking the talk and integrating and doing my best to practice the principles that I talk about on the show or other people are also talking about. And I just think in a bigger scope, my inclination is from a very young age, been interested in others and people, why they do what they do. I think in middle school, I was proclaiming that I wanted to be a psychologist even then, and then got an undergrad in psych. And after my undergrad, I did AmeriCorps, I ran a teen program. I very much was in the service and wanting to make a difference. Went to get a master's. And at that time I was in relationship and thought that this person was the one. We both thought we were the one for one another. And we ran up against a tremendous amount of conflict and difficulty. And I felt very well equipped given my background in psychology, also growing up in a progressive family where I was being taught I statements from a very young age. And I felt stunned that, so much of the media messaging is find the one. There's so much emphasis on finding the right fit, and felt as though we had, and we both run out and we got support. We went to therapists and all types of people to get some assistance. And we really struggled. And also simultaneously, I got accepted into a PhD program and moved. And to say the least, that relationship did not continue, but it did spawn me on a personal journey to be in this quest of what's happening in these relationship dynamics that I haven't been exposed to. And really, I was reading David Schnarch's Passionate Marriage, Resurrecting Sex. I was reading, I think it was Conscious Loving by Gay and Katie Hendricks. I was reading the Gottmans. I was reading all kinds of things, and I was understanding what was some of the background around our pattern and where we were getting stuck. Had I known what I know now, I realized that that could have been a different dynamic. And yet I met my now husband probably a year. Well, I met him, but we were friends for 6-7 months before we actually started dating. And I feel like I was so deeply committed to my practice in my relating and relationship. And it really set me up to be in a place where I was cultivating conscious relationship. So I met him in 2005. We started dating in 2006, and we've been together ever since. We've been married over 10 plus years. So very much grateful for the work I've done personally and also in my relationship and practicing these principles. I'm happy to share more stories, but that's where I'm coming from. And I just also shared with you both before we got started, my dissertation was on conscious intimate relationship. And still, it's just a lifelong journey to really distill these principles and put them into practice and work. So I'm very passionate about helping people evolve in their love.
I just love hearing the patience around when you're in a relationship. I'm not sure if we shared this on your podcast, but in our lobby, we have our partner is our greatest teacher. Be patient for the lessons. Not a lot of us have patience for those lessons, but that you are intentionally conscious around, okay, I know these things now. I've learned these things. I've experienced these. And how do I practice that in my relationship? And now you are an expert to hundreds, thousands of couples, I'm sure, and just helping them from your own experience. So,
yes. And I want to just echo that even though I don't feel like I have, I feel like I have some really good sense and I have a lay of the land and I trust it. And throughout the journey of practicing, just the attitude of looking at what gets evoked in the relationship dynamic and seeing my partner as holding a mirror for me and the opportunity that exists, that is a huge paradigm shift and has been so helpful for really evolving and turning towards some of the healing and growth.
I think that metaphor of the mirror is an excellent transition into our topic today, which is criticism. And I think the phrase you use is shifting criticism into connected communication. And I know that when a mirror is held up to us, when it's just a mirror, we know it's just reflecting something that is, reality. But when our partner is the one who is the mirror, I think it oftentimes does feel like criticism and not help. So let's jump right in there. Help us understand just on a beginning level of that process and what you're trying to communicate to couples around this.
Well, I want to acknowledge just criticism or the critical tendency is not inherently bad. It's when we look at the relational space, it can be extremely problematic, and I'll explain why. And just also in Western culture, we're in the US, and it's having the critique and the ability to evaluate and assess is very much needed. And particularly when we look at education, certain professions, this critical tendency is often highly regarded. And so when we look at relationship, and I know a lot of your audience is familiar with attachment, so I'm going to speak in some of these terms, which I think will give some context to what you're describing here with the dynamics. So when there's a couple and one person is using the critical tendency or resorting to criticism, first of all, many of us aren't even aware that we're being critical. It's a habit often. It's something that is more intellectual. And so if we're in our work, in our profession, and it's hard to switch hats, like if an executive is calling shots all day or a surgeon or whomever is making a lot of decisions, it can be difficult to switch that approach and way of relating and turning towards intimate relationships. So I just want to acknowledge again the commonality of kind of switching from that headspace. But when there's a complaint or a grievance and we bring it to our significant other and we describe it in terms of what we have issue in the other, the common response is to feel defensive, to feel some issue with how they're being characterized and want to rebuttal. So when one comes with that complaint, it's often when we look at attachment, we have protests. We are trying to raise our hand. We're trying to signal to our other, hey, something's not working. I'm hurt or I'm afraid or something's not okay. So the underneath is really this intention to say, hey, this isn't working, and to want attention about that, right? So in life, we typically want to point to the thing that hurts, like, ow, right? We see it in our children, like there's some pointing to the thing that hurts. And that's a common human thing. And so as we look at this as a protest, what's often true about protest tendencies is it's also a way that we protect ourselves. So there's a lot that can inform this critical tendency, how we were raised. Again, I've already mentioned this intellectual way of approaching the world. And also when we look at intimate relationship, this is typically not received well, and for many reasons.
Yeah, I mean, what's jumping out to me immediately is sort of an agreement that we have to have with our partner of what it is when we come to them and talk to them about something we're pointing out about them, and the difference between it being like, hey, you're doing this, I need you to stop it so I feel okay. Stop talking in that tone, or stop being on your phone all the time, or whatever. And that when it comes from that place, it feels much more judgmental and like you're doing something wrong, versus when you come to your partner and it's genuinely out of like, hey, this is like probably important information for you to have in your own like sort of evolution, and you being the person that you want to be, not the person that I want you to be, but the person that you tell me you want to be.
If they're open to feedback, I mean, that's part of where it gets tricky, is we have a front row seat to our partner. And unfortunately, in intimate relationship, our partner isn't as interested. I mean, if it's solicited, there's a big distinguish. If it's solicited, yes, they want your feedback. They're like, what do you think about this? Or can you give me feedback? I've noticed I'm not aware of some blind spots and I really would love your perspective. Like there's a soliciting that is welcoming. When it's unsolicited, most of the time, as the two of you both know, we are bonding in relationship for that sense of secure, safe refuge, that sense of connection, and that feeling of love and nurturance that we are both mutually caring for each other. So the unsolicited feedback is kind of getting in someone's lane. And again, the intention underneath it is often not to get in that person's lane and tell them about themselves. There's this deeper feeling of something's not okay. I'm either hurt or I have a fear or something's going on, but we don't lead with that. So it can get off and running and we're missing signals because the person's defending against the critique or the assessment. And that's not actually the thing that is needing attention. Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense, because what I'm thinking too is, especially if one partner is triggered, the other partner gets triggered to their trigger instead of holding the space. And that's when the separation, disconnection, both partners feeling judged. I'm not doing this right. Oh, and here's my partner saying I can't get it right ever. But actually, that goes way back, from probably early attachment, these negative core beliefs that come up in those moments. But the couple doesn't take the time to understand what's really happening underneath. And then they just get caught in that pattern of feeling like they can't be connected during difficult moments where we have to be able to share things that might be uncomfortable.
Yes. And this is so nuanced.
I know.
TJ, I really appreciate what you're describing, because the way in which we're bringing something to our partner, the tone, the facial expressions, the quality, I think when there is a lot of safety in the dynamic, partners can tolerate criticism, especially when it's delivered in a way that you're describing, that there's a sense of goodwill and a wondering and a offer that's intended to be helpful. And I think there's way more tolerance for that. I think when I kind of chimed in, it was referencing when that isn't established or there's some negative pattern already at play, that this can get really hooked. And so it can be in a nanosecond, the reactivity and how quickly, to your point, Tara, it's off and running.
Yeah. The walls fly up.
And
Yep.
it's not even because, those are the couples we see that don't have the emotional safety that we have to help them build. So this is very common in everyday sessions for all of our therapists here, including us. And for even in our relationship, it's a way that EJ looks in his eyes. He doesn't even have to say anything. And I know we have emotional safety built, but it took a really long time. And I don't think he even understood the weight of like his eyes. It's like there's a pressure behind it or something. And I'm like, oh, he is judging me. He is not liking me right now. This thing is happening.
I just really want to comment on what you're saying, because we, with our significant other, that sense of feeling loved and seen, and like how important that is, how much that other person matters. And when we can feel that it's shifted into something else, like it can evoke a lot of those fears. So it can have a lot of charge to it. I can raise my hand with this, that when I see my husband displeased or upset, I can feel inside myself how quickly I notice. And we've worked our patterns and I've really evolved a lot, but I definitely come from more of some anxious tendencies. On the continuum. I don't know how extreme, but definitely have had that lens. And also just a quick note, it has been helpful when we talk about language, as we're using criticism is often delivered through language. I do think, with the 5 love languages, if one is high in words of affirmation, we've often heard that if there's a negative expression in one's love language, it can hurt more. So if one is words of affirmation and that's their primary love language, hearing words that are negative or critical can actually hurt more. It's similar, like my husband, when we first met, he's very much acts of service as his number one. And I'm like, he's so helpful. He's doing all these things. And I'm like, I had to interpret, he's really liking me. But I also somehow picked up, I follow through and I care about my commitments, but I grew up on the West Coast. There is a little bit of more loose than he grew up in the Midwest. And it's like, you're on time, like you're actually early. So I realized if I don't follow through, it actually hurts him way more, because acts of service. So if I don't actually do what I said I was going to do, it's going to hurt more than it would for other people. Like if he just doesn't follow through, I'm like, okay, like he had something else. So
that blows my mind that you just did that whole perception opposite of what the love language is, because as soon as you said that, I'm always learning. Thank you, Dr. Higgins. Thank you. Because I'm an acts of service girl. And when EJ doesn't follow through, it hurts so bad, but I would have never, ever connected that to my love language until just now to see it that opposite. Yeah. Isn't that so true?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. It's the follow through. Okay. Sorry.
All
Thank
right.
you.
So
love those moments.
One of the things I heard was that so much happens like almost unconsciously underneath the surface that couples aren't aware of, right? So I'd like to start for our audience. If somebody's sitting in the audience and they're identifying like it just feels like we have this very critical relationship and we can't give each other feedback without it feeling like one person is being criticized or the other person is being criticized. So what's the starting point for you with a couple and helping them sort of begin to understand and address this dynamic in their relationship?
Well, typically for the individual that's really looking at building awareness around a critical tendency, likely they've had some suspicion or wondering about it already, but getting input from their significant other, they're like, hey, I really struggle with this approach you take with me. It seems highly critical, or you seem to always be correcting or complaining, or, something about what I'm doing. And so for the person that is more critical, likely they can recognize, perhaps I grew up in a family where achievement was highly revered, or that sense of accomplishment and achievement, or perhaps I saw criticism being conveyed, or I felt criticized, or even still in the family upbringing, there wasn't a lot of room and space for attuning to emotion. So I just learned to not show emotion. I learned to kind of go to the intellect, perfect. These people tend to be people who resonate with being a little bit more critical, tend to be more perfectionistic, type A, or want to have things really dialed in. And sometimes that's a way of minimizing anxiety, fear, like the things that are underneath. And so just as a starting point to answer your question, EJ, to recognize just willing ourselves to stop. Like a lot of people attempt to just say, okay, I recognize it, I see it, I'm just going to not do this anymore. But there's a very deep instilled habitual pattern, and it actually can even be a little bit of addictive because we get a little hit when we're right, or we feel like we're telling somebody, or it's just this utilizing the part of the brain that gives that little bit of a dopamine hit. So can't even feel this almost competitive.
Yeah.
So I just want to hold space that to recognize that willpower or just trying to stop typically doesn't lead to lasting change. What we want to really get at, to your point, is some deeper understanding of what is motivating this, what is fueling this, what gets activated so that it's flying out of my mouth before I even can recognize, to your point about it being unconscious, like there's something happening that I'm in service of, that protest. That attention, seeking something. Yeah.
And one thing that is so important that we also try to help our couples with is that, let's just say there is the partner that's being criticized and the other partner who's more of the criticizer, if you will. But that other partner isn't used to having a voice or speaking up or saying, hey, I got to let you know that just feels really bad. So then the other person can't grow from it too, because they don't even know. It's so automatic. It's so unconscious. Like, oh, well, you've never said anything before. Like, I had no idea that bothered you. And you're telling me now, and it's been 20 years. How many times have we heard this, EJ?
Yes.
And so it's like all that resentment over 20 years. And so I think it's about having that conversation when things feel neutral, just around the topic of criticism, how it was in their family, how it is for each of them, starting to kind of build resourcing that they can have conversations around certain topics. I just know that we have so many couples that they've never even said that bothers me. They just get into that. They're in that conflict, but they don't quite know why.
Well, this brings to mind, I actually haven't really woven this in, so I'm grateful you're bringing this up, that in the history of the dynamic, if there's one that's a little bit more of an extrovert, can externally process, their pacing is faster typically. They can articulate faster. So for the one that maybe doesn't feel like they get as much airtime, can feel like, oh, like they're occupying a lot of space around their experience and their perspective. And I don't feel that I'm being represented enough here, or I don't get as much of a voice, to your point, and the hurt and the resentment. So the dynamic is very problematic. And I actually appreciate you bringing this up also, because it is worth saying, and I'm sure many people are familiar with this, the Gottmans have done a beautiful job in all the research in their institute. And they came up with the 4 horsemen, and one of them is the criticism and defensiveness. So that loop is over time. This is where people say death by 1,000 cuts, right? It's not, we wouldn't look at that and say, ooh, that's, if you don't address that, you might be getting a divorce, right? But if we look at the accumulation, because it's not a turn towards at all. It's not welcoming. It's not creating this goodwill that we really want to feel with our significant other.
Well, and one thing I found too is that once couples can get through this and have difficult conversations and share with each other what would feel good, what wouldn't feel good, they can handle it now. Like, I don't think they ever had this internal belief, like, even when they're growing up, a lot of work we do here is attachment theory. Like, maybe their family, like you said, wasn't emotionally attuned. They don't have that ability to regulate emotions when things get difficult. But now they're able to handle it together, to regulate their nervous systems together. And they feel like, oh my gosh, that feels so good. We had no idea.
Yes, that it's safe.
Yes.
It's safe to bring the vulnerability. It's safe to reveal the inside. No one's ever really been interested in that or seemingly interested in it. Therefore, I have not led with it.
And for maybe the first time ever, they can actually have a voice, and that voice is okay, even if it hurts the other person at times.
Yes.
Because they know it's not intentional and that they're not a bad person.
In our relationship, what's been interesting is, like, we had an agreement very early on that we wanted to learn from each other. And we were both committed to our own personal growth, and that we recognized and then we integrated into our work with couples that look, I can actually learn a lot from your criticism or your perspective of me. And so we had that baseline, and we got that really early on.
Probably because we're
Yeah.
therapists.
And there's consent,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
With the agreement, there's consent that I'm
Yep.
asking for this. I'm soliciting this.
We made that agreement, but then we've spent the last, decade plus trying to figure out how to do it,
Mm.
and it's been like this real like two facets of like one trying to figure out just the communication, like, okay, how can we communicate with each other in these moments that feels good to the other person and is hearable.
Mhm.
But then the other side is like, just personally, it's like, it's been like this deep, very intricate work about like, why do I get so reactive, and taking accountability for it and even realizing it. That was one of the things when Tarah was talking about like the look in my eyes or whatever. Like, I felt like there would be these, sort of criticisms within criticisms of like, I'm telling you this and your eyes are doing this. And I would be like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm just like sitting here. And then it took this like deep reflection of like, okay, what is really going on a subtle level for me, like, and it all tied back to attachment stuff. And I'm, still,
Sure.
sorting that all out of like, what are these like deeply entrenched responses and defensiveness, that I have.
Hmm. It's interesting, even as you're describing this and the journey that you and Tara have been on around giving feedback to one another. I love just how much you're aspiring and also co-creating together this partnership and the growth and the learning and the value for that. My husband and I also, in different ways, feel that's very much a part of our value. And I also say for myself, there are times where if I'm tired or stressed or whatever, don't have as much capacity, I actually am not as available for his feedback. And so timing feels really important for me to be able to give some voice to so that it can be more received and more constructive. And there are times, depending on my regulation, that I can hear his feedback. And when I do and really receive it as a gift and the learning that comes with that versus me like white knuckling it,
Right.
it's a huge difference. And being on the receiving end, like, I wouldn't say my husband's critical, like, toward me, but what I have observed in him, which is less now, but particularly in those early years, I remember remarking to him, I'm like, you're telling me a lot about what you don't like, but it's really not helping me understand what you do want or what you do like. So I think this fits with criticism in that if we're leading with the complaint, the other person might be getting sucked into responding to that complaint, whether or not they're defending or, recrafting reality of like, no, that's not what happened. Here's what happened, often running around that. But it's almost like a smoke signal that like, oh, can you tell me what that's like for you? Or can you help me with, as you're bringing this up and this doesn't work for you, can you tell me what happens for you? So that's what the person's raising their hand about.
Right.
And if we're not attending to that, likely we're going to get off track.
Yes, absolutely. We always use that when we, that it's called the taxi cab of love. We don't get in a taxi and say, we don't want to go here and we don't want to go here and we don't want to go here. We get into the taxi and say, please take me to the University of Arizona bookstore so I can buy a U of A shirt. And so helping have that reframe in relationships, especially when we're doing goals with couples, it is a constant reframing. What do you want? What would feel better? And then that automatically opens up your heart and it just opens up a discussion in such a different way because the negativity isn't there. Yeah. You're actually working together on resolution on how this could feel better together. And that feels really good. You're going in the same taxi cab to the same location.
Yeah. All right. I love that. So we've talked a lot about like some of the characteristics of critical communication that don't feel good, that are counterproductive, that pull you apart. And you talk about transforming it to connected communication, right? So what are the characteristics, if we're trying to say get in the cab and with your partner and decide where you guys want to go together, what are the characteristics of connected communication?
Yes. Thank you for asking, because that's really at the heart of this. And I can lead with just the core. I like to encourage and practice myself to, instead of a complaint or a criticism, can I lead with a request or can I lead with a reveal? And the reveal is typically the harder because it is that vulnerable, here's what's on the inside. And often in modern day living, things are moving so quickly. There's many times I don't even know what I'm feeling.
Yeah.
And so I actually need to take pause and really reflect, what is getting me all juiced up here? Like, what's this reaction about? And I have to give some space for self-inquiry, self-reflection, because as we talk about attachment in these, if we've done a level of work, we could have some pretty good indication of like, oh, I'm a little more prone to getting worried that he's not with me, or fear he doesn't want to work this out, or fear of abandonment, or I have more of a fear like not good enough, or somehow I'm failing, or, these type of things. If we have a lay of the land, we can reference that. Like, is there anything around that? But there could be other circumstances that just are activating or triggering or something. And things happen so fast. So if we can slow down, have some inquiry, get into some of those deeper. One of the questions I like to ask is, if I'm complaining, what would the thing that I'm asking for, like in that complaint, if I got that, or if that complaint was resolved, what would it allow me to feel?
Okay. Can you give a concrete, like, especially reveal? Because that sounds vulnerable and intimate.
Okay. So one of my husband and I's patterns, so early on, one of his protective strategies was more to kind of shut down or to get quiet or get more contained when things would start to feel tense. And my tendency was a little bit more of that active. I'd done a level of work, so the way it looked was more polished, but it was still the energy of pursue. So asking questions in a gentle way, but still the energy of seeking him out.
Come back to me.
Come back. Yes. Like, where are you? And just looking for understanding. That's often what I'm leading with. But the underpinning of the attachment is like, are we good? So in conflict, what this used to look like was there would be points, if it was escalated enough, where he couldn't really engage. And then I'm flailing, like, what's happening? Are we okay? And sometimes it would be a day, sometimes it would be hours, sometimes it would be more than one day. And it was incredibly painful. I go through all this process of like, I don't know, and just, it was a lot of material for me to work with. But as our relationship evolved, I would say probably maybe 8 years later, I had this understanding of like, oh, if I just know he wants to work this out, like that would help me. So I remember asking him, can you just tell me, or do you want to work this out? I just wanted to know. That was so relieving and soothing to me, because if I knew he wanted to work it out, I could tolerate. So to answer your question, initially I would give him feedback, air quotes, around him shutting down or getting quiet and not engaging. And that was a complaint or perhaps even a criticism. And so how I could turn that into a request is, can you tell me you're going to come back? Can you tell me this still matters to you? Or to your point about the deeper reveal would be, I've known a lot of loss in my life and you mean the world to me. And when we get in conflict, I can even feel the emotion of it now, that I get scared and I want to reach for you, and it's hard to give you space. And that's what's happening for me. So the reveal is a real emotional, like on a deep level, how much you mean to me, how scary this is. And I get frightened. Like, that's pretty much the reveal. I can't go any deeper than that. Like, that's, and what I would say and practice over and over and over again, the times that I would criticize him or the times that I would be pursuing him, he would not respond. Like, I pretty much like earth, like rock, not moving. And then when I would reveal to him vulnerably, I mean, if he's super, super triggered, I can't remember if he could hear me, but other than that, I've never yet had a time where he hasn't responded and turned towards me and leaned in, and how like powerful that is.
It's so beautiful, because it's like the difference between you're abandoning me, you're not present,
there's something wrong with you,
can't handle this, and I'm frightened, I'm scared. I just want to feel connected even in these difficult moments. And the other person puts their walls up. And then the other, we talk to couples about this all the time. The other way, that is, you call it reveal, opening up vulnerably, it's disarming.
Yeah.
Because you're like, oh my God, my partner is like suffering. They're in pain.
Yeah,
Like, oh
exactly.
shit, like I love them. And it's organic.
Right. It's not manipulated. It's not crafted to like, yeah, manipulate or have a technique. And it really helps him with his attachment style, because if I would pursue or ask questions or even complain, he's going into his fear of letting me down, not being good enough, and all his stuff.
Yeah.
So that's his coping strategy, is to minimize the negative interactions, to de-escalate, protect the relationship. And I can't see any of that, right?
Yeah.
So if I reveal, it helps him feel like, oh, all the things I was imagining that she was thinking I was awful and like letting her down and terrible. Oh, she's just hurting, and it softens it. I can turn towards her, and it helps.
Jessica, when I saw you sharing the reveal, because again, if our individuals, our couples can get there, it is really hard. It's vulnerable.
Yeah.
There's that fear of like, oh my gosh, I've never not had my guards up. What does that mean? And I could tell how powerful it was for you as soon as you were feeling that. I was feeling it with you, because couples don't realize the freedom it actually brings. And we know it because I've been there. It's like, I love that I can just melt now and do the reveals. Not all the time. I'm not perfect at it for sure. And I think because we have that knowledge and the feeling of it, that's how we help so many couples. And I'm sure you can relate, because like you freaking know what it feels like now. And you are the hope holders when couples are hopeless, because you've been there and we've done the work. Well, we continue to do the work, right, all the time. But yeah, how do you get to the reveal? Thank you. That was just beautiful, really.
Yeah. Yeah. And it can also add, in the early stages when I had no idea, now we have a level of security that this doesn't get activated because we've worked our patterns and he's showing, I mean, we've resolved a lot of the disconnect. So this doesn't happen. Not to say that it wouldn't ever happen, but I can say in the early stages when I was really confronted with this, it also was really healing for me to have my own 2 feet underneath me, that I didn't know. It was a mystery. It was scary. I was taking a huge risk, and I could also hold like, I'm scared, rather than pursue. And I'm not even acknowledging that I'm scared.
Yeah.
Like in some ways I was having my own back and holding myself around, I'm scared. And when I know that I'm scared, or someone that I love is scared, I want to support that fear. Right. So it puts me in a very different position where have my own back. I'm kind of not abandoning myself.
Yeah. You're needing yourself and your partner needs you too. That always feels really good.
Yeah.
I just think it's so just counterintuitive to our own natural reactions. I think that's what, it's just always important for us to normalize for couples out there, that because I think sometimes when people hear stuff like this and hear such like a vulnerable opening up that you're now able to do with your partner, they're just like, I can't even imagine that. It's just so far out of their experience.
Right.
And that we have to be the ones to help people understand that like it's a process.
Yeah. Well, it is a process, and it is incremental. Like I went pretty deep, so I can use another example that's not as deep that might also help. But what I will say is that most people can recognize there's a lot of energy expenditure. So it's not as though effort isn't being already invested, and yet it's not leading to a result. And so if we can look at and even take smaller steps in this request or reveal, the energy shift, even if it might feel like I'm going to take a risk, but it's not like the deepest risk, like on a scale from 1 to 10, it's not a 10, but I can start to feel the result of that, which is highly motivating, right? If we get some iteration of this, it's like, I don't want to go back to the other way of just like spinning and spinning and spinning and nothing really ever really happening that feels productive.
We call kind of what you're saying, what you're talking about, we call it the shift, because so many couples will be like, what if we go back? I'm like, oh, you won't. Not after you go there. There's no way you're going back.
Yeah, even if you have a hiccup or you have a backslide, you have that felt sense of like, there's just a couple times I remember in our relationship where Tarah's walls went down and I really saw her suffering. And I didn't take it as like, honestly, like it was my fault, but I understood and saw that it came from a deeper place that existed before me. And then when maybe in the future she would have a reaction where where maybe she didn't communicate it in a way where it did feel like criticism, I was able to access, a resource back to like, okay, this is her suffering. And I would just like tell myself, that was a tool that I use. Like I was like,
Mm.
she is suffering. She is suffering. This is her deepest suffering. It may not look like it. It may look like aggression or it may feel like aggression, but I had that access point because she was brave enough at some point to let it all down. Then I also had the resource to be like, okay, if I occupy a certain space with her, she might put her weapons down.
Nice.
I have the capability of creating a space for her where she can soften this up and really like help me understand what's going on.
Hmm. Well, and I love what you're both describing. And I do think it's when we get a sense of this, we're in service of that, right? It's so powerful, that shift. We want to be in service of that, that we either partner can support in shifting out of that criticism, defensiveness. And I do think asking those questions of like, I'm showing you I'm an ally. I'm giving you my soft eyes and I'm giving you some soft voice and I'm interested. Can you help me? Like you're leading with criticism and not even to necessarily say that, but just like that's happening and tell me about you, right? Like I'm here. You want to say more, right? Like I think that's really disarming incredibly.
Yeah.
So just another example that is one of these. I think the Gottmans say every couple has 7 to 8 irreconcilable differences. And this is one of them where I'm more of a planner and my husband's more looking at what's the most efficient route to get the result. And I'm like, what is I scan all my options. I do my cast the wide net, do all the research. And then I'm like, get down to the top few. And I've learned if I can give him a top few, it's less overwhelming for him. But I'm like looking for the best result or the best I can possibly do, not best by anyone else's definition, but the best I can do. And so this shows up in many different ways. But one example as of recently is like if we're wanting to take a trip, I'm going to want to look at how to maximize. And he's looking at how to streamline in a way that's more efficient. So those inherently aren't conflictual. They can be complementary. We can learn from each other, which we have done. But on face value, if we're not aware,
Right.
it can look highly critical for him to be like, oh, you like, you want to do everything or like, that's just crazy. Or, he'll criticize it as to like, that's just maddening that you would want to do all that pace. And then I'm like, are you not wanting to put in the effort? I don't say these things, but might think, is this just lazy or like, so it's like
done all this planning. Do you not appreciate me?
Exactly. Right. So I remember we were actually in Asheville. We were trying to decide if we wanted to go to the beach and we're just trying to decide which weekend. And I can feel like the intention for us is to have a good time or maybe gonna celebrate. I forgot where we were going to celebrate something. And I'm using the enthusiasm I'm feeling as excitement of like, here's all the ideas. And I'm feeling him get resistant. I'm feeling him get a little snippy and kind of a little critical. And I'm like, I'm like not understanding what's happening. And we're going through different cycles of him saying something and me talking possibility. And it's just getting off track. And I'm like, what's happening? I was like, so I did kind of what you were describing, EJ. I was like, what might be going on for him? I didn't even ask him. I was just like, and I'm like, oh, well, this is classic. I'm like, he probably is feeling overwhelmed. And I was like, I asked him something about, I actually need to recall this better, but it was something to the effect of like, oh, is this feeling overwhelming to you? And he's like, yes. I'm like, oh,
thank you.
Okay, we can do this in a less overwhelming way. Like, and then I was like, well, can you tell me that? Like, rather than criticizing me, like that you're needing this to be a little more simple because we're doing a lot right now and not wanting to overwhelm. And I'm like, I can get behind that. Like, I want to show that's the important thing here, that if we're have access to what's on the inside, whether or not it's a request or a reveal, people want to show up. Your loved one wants to help. Right. But the criticism is like, I don't want to feel criticized. So I want to defend against that. So once I understand, it helps me get where he's at. And then I want to help. And that gets us into more of that connection.
the first example you gave was very intimate, and reveal feels a lot more like deep. It's like opening up about something that's very soft and maybe protected. And then the other was the request, and that's a little more like, it's a little more practical, and it's a sort of a step in the right direction. It was like,
Attunement.
and you were just asking him like, what do you need?
Yeah.
Do you need me to, you were kind of helping him make a request.
Yes.
And then you're taking care of him. He's safe.
Attuning. Yes.
It's a pivot. It's a pivot off of the content.
For sure.
We're planning a trip and I'm excited and we're getting stuck and I don't know what's happening. And it's a pivot to the emotional attunement around something's happening here that's we're not flowing. And what is that?
Yeah. And there's like an implied underneath to him, I care.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it feels like we're in opposition right now because we each have our own little operating system about how we function on a vacation, I care actually about yours. And it's, it's just beautiful. It connects, it softens things. It makes us realize like, actually we're on the same team. And that's something that I know early in our relationship, like I think both of us would occasionally just look at each other and be like, we're on the same team here. Like we're in like, Costa Rica or something, or we're, we're at our kid's birthday party and we both want the same thing for it to be fun, but it feels like we're in opposition to one another instead of on the same team.
And we all deserve to be in relationship where we're on the same team, right? This is why we do this work.
Yeah. Well, clearly we could talk for hours and hours with you. It's so cool. We hadn't spoken with you since we've been on your podcast.
I know.
And so, I know we got to talk a little bit before this, but once we get flowing with you, it's so fantastic.
I know.
We're clearly coming from similar places and we're doing very similar stuff with maybe like a little bit different, words around it. But it's amazing. It was wonderful to have you. Could you maybe just, for our audience, if they're really connecting with you and your language and how how can they connect with you? Just kind of help them know how to get to you.
Yeah, thank you. And it is such a treat and really special to spend this time with you. I can feel the resonance and I do feel like we could talk for hours.
I know.
Yeah, I love being with like-minded people and the philosophy and the passion around this work. So for listeners that are interested in practicing and putting this into play a little bit more, there's a free guide, which I believe you'll have the link for the show notes.
Absolutely.
And it's a free guide that gives language, and it's like 22 examples actually of what a critical tendency could look like or would look like, and what more of this request or reveal looks like, so that perhaps you can start to reverse engineer some of this. Because sometimes even on a reveal, it doesn't have to be what I just did. It could be like on a scale from 1 to 10, it can be a 2. Like for my husband, I'm starting to feel overwhelmed and I'd like to plan on something a little bit more simple. Like it's a reveal and a request, right? That's combined. Yeah. So I think there are ways that we can access this. And so there's tons of examples there. It's a free guide that gives you that support. I also have a podcast, which the two of you have been on, and maybe you want to include the link that you were on my show, which is called the Empowered Relationship Podcast. And all of this can be found also on my website, which is drjessicahiggins.com. That's doctor with a DR. And there's many more resources there as well.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on our podcast. It's been just a pleasure and a really engaging conversation.
And just let's start thinking about our next topic so we can see you sooner than later.
Yeah, we want to have you down to Tucson and have you into our office. That would be wonderful. All right. Well, and, thank you all for listening. We just appreciate every single one of you so much tuning in. Please, if you ever have a topic that you're like, please talk about this, just email us at info@relationshiprenovation.com. Visit our website and check out, everything that we're doing. That's relationshiprenovation.com.
And as always, take care of yourself, take care of each other. Bye-bye.
Singing on the train, me and you listening to the rain, me and you, we are the same.